Hello, my name is Liza Leonard, and on behalf of the entire board of the City Club of Idaho Falls, thank you for joining us for today's program. With us today, we have Wayne Hoffman, president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, presenting a program, Idaho Freedom Foundation's Role in Idaho Policy. Today's program is presented by the City Club of Idaho Falls, but I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge some of our sponsors. Our sponsors include Idaho National Laboratory, Bank of Idaho, Floor Idaho, Idaho State University, Mountain View Hospital, and KISU-FM. You'll notice also that we are here again in the IE production studio. We appreciate their support as we continue to be able to bring you virtual programs from the City Club. We will continue to do these programs in this manner as long as we need and as long as IE Productions will let us return. And I'll also remind you that for future programs, to find out information about the City Club, please visit us at ifcityclub.com. Again, that's ifcityclub.com. You can find our programs also on Idaho Falls Lunch Inn's Facebook page and on IE Productions' YouTube channel. For those of you new to us, the City Club of Idaho Falls is a club made up of members of our local community and is open to guests. And I'd just like to share a moment with you our mission of the City Club. We are an independent, nonpartisan forum for the discussion of public affairs. The City Club of Idaho Falls exists to sponsor and promote civil dialogue and discourse on all manners of public interest. We strive to do so in a nonpartisan and non-sectarian manner while encouraging broad participation by the community at large. As a club, we address challenging topics, and we invite our audience to be a part of the discussion. I want to remind you that we are accepting questions today, and today's moderator, Dr. David Adler, who I will introduce in a moment, will do his best to address those questions after the program. As is customary with the City Club of Idaho Falls, we are promoting civil discourse and welcome respectful discussion on the topics that we raise. It's not uncommon for us to cover difficult topics, and we welcome different viewpoints and opinions. And it is our intention to keep difficult conversations going, and we welcome you to join us in this spirit of civility. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to today's moderator, Dr. David Adler. Many of you know Dr. Adler well, but I will give you a little bit of detail of his biography. David Gray Adler is president of the Alturas Institute, a nonprofit organization created to advance American democracy by promoting the Constitution, civil education, gender equality, and equal protection of the law. Adler's scholarly writings have been quoted by the U.S. Supreme Court, lower federal courts, the U.S. Attorney General, the White House Counsel, the legal advisor to the State Department, by Republicans and Democrats in both houses of Congress. Adler has taught courses on the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Supreme Court at all three universities in Idaho. In 2010, he was the recipient of the Idaho Humanities Council Distinguished Humanities Award. I'll now turn the time over to Dr. David Adler.
Thank you very much, Liza. Welcome. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you again. We have a terrific program today. It's our pleasure today to invite our guest speaker, Mr. Wayne Hoffman, who is president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, an organization well known throughout Idaho. Wayne has held this post since 2009, and he's been committed to promoting free market principles and in many ways libertarian doctrines. He speaks widely throughout the state on a variety of local, state, regional, and occasionally national issues, particularly focusing on taxation, regulation, the role of government, the purpose of government, and also the role of government in education. A former newspaperman and journalist, Wayne Hoffman hails from Arkansas, where he graduated from Arkansas State, came to Idaho to take a job at a news station in Twin Falls, and then moved on to become a reporter for the Idaho Statesman and the Herald Press Tribune. Many of you have seen his frequent columns in newspapers throughout Idaho. He continues to write opinion pieces for various papers in our state. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Wayne Hoffman, who will offer some remarks for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll turn to your questions. So Wayne, nice to have you here with us today.
Well, thanks, David, and thanks, Liza and the City Club. Really appreciate you having me. You know, it's interesting, as I've been in town for a couple of days, a lot of people have said to me, oh, you're going to be at City Club. And then they'll say, how did you manage that? That those people are really left of center. Why would they have you on there? And I said, honestly, I don't know. They invited me, and I really appreciate the invitation. And really, I've always enjoyed the opportunity to tell a little bit more about our organization and the things that we do, because I think a lot of it gets lost in the translation of the news media. Which, as David pointed out, I spent a lot of years in, so I have some understanding of how that comes to happen. But I just want to tell a little bit about what the Freedom Foundation is, what we do, and why we do it. And a lot of people like to label us as being a libertarian organization. It says right on our website, we're an organization that believes in conservative values, and we believe in applying Idaho solutions to the problems of the day. And we generally believe that government is not the answer to the problem. Actually, Ronald Reagan said very succinctly that government is not the solution to the problem, and I think Milton Friedman added on to that by saying if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert, it will be out of sand in 5 years. I have not seen that not play out the way Dr. Friedman had suggested it would. It's always turned out that way. But let's just go back to Idaho. For those of you who aren't familiar with what the Idaho Freedom Foundation does, but maybe you've heard of other think tanks that you pay attention to. So, for example, on a national level, on the left, you have groups like the Brookings Institute. On the right, you have organizations like the Heritage Foundation or the Cato Institute. They work a lot on national issues. We mainly focus on Idaho. There are occasions when the policies we work on end up being used or talked about on a national level, and that happens from time to time, which is great. But we focus on Idaho, and we focus on trying to find conservative free market solutions to the problems that confront us. It's interesting, when we started back at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, people would say, well, why do we need a free market think tank in Idaho? After all, the legislature is 85% Republican. All the executive offices are held by Republicans. The congressional delegation's Republican. Why do we need a conservative organization? Wouldn't you just be piling on to what the Republicans are already saying? And the answer is quite clearly no. We have been a source of knowledge, inspiration, research that has led to public policy reforms that otherwise would not happen without our involvement. Basically, policy is made by the folks that show up. And when you have a lot of folks showing up in the room who are lobbyists for various special interest groups, or they represent leftist ideology, just because the people you elect happen to be from one political party or another doesn't mean it's the outcome that you're going to get. And I'll give you several examples of that. When we started the Freedom Foundation, we pointed out that that actually it was a matter of state public policy that the state taxpayer dollars go to political parties. And there are many people who were surprised by this. There's not a line item in the budget that says, here's the amount of money that the state taxpayers are giving to the Republican Party or the Democrats. It basically was taking money off the top. And when you filled out your income tax form, there was a box that said, do you want to give $1 to the political party of your choice? And you'd have a chance to select that political party. And there was a notation in the instructions for the tax form that said, this dollar, this contribution you're making, won't either decrease your refund or increase your tax liability. And you had to ask, well, how does that work? Well, the way it works was every time a taxpayer made a designation to give $1 to the political party of his or her choice, basically the money was taken out of circulation before it reached the general fund. So you have your tax collections, and then you have your general fund, and somewhere in between there, the money would get intercepted and be sent to the Secretary of State's office to distribute to the political parties. So legislators weren't aware of this. And even though it was implemented in 1974, we pointed that out. Legislators said that's terrible. And ultimately, the policy was repealed, and that was in 2010. So again, that's just one example of a policy that was put into effect probably by Republicans and remained in effect under the tutelage of Republicans. But then we managed to come along and say, here's a policy you might want to take a look at revisiting. We didn't lobby the issue. We just said, here's something that we believe is contrary to the proper rule of government. And legislators, Republicans and Democrats, listened to what we had to say. There are other types of reforms that we've made along the way that we're very proud of. For example, we're very big in government transparency. In 2000-ish, 2002, the Idaho legislature was among the first in the country to install cameras in the House and Senate chambers. And it was a very novel thing. Now, back in those days, when you watched the floor sessions in the House and the Senate, it was really, really microscopic. You'd see these little bodies moving around and little dots that would get up to testify. You couldn't really see who anybody was. There wasn't any captioning to reveal the names of the speakers. You just kind of had to know who they were. And since then, of course, the technology has gotten way better. But there was a rule that was put in place. It was very informal. And as a matter of practice, the legislature took those videos every 5 days and deleted them. So if you wanted to go back and get a record of what transpired on the House and Senate floor, you had to get it within 5 days or it was just too late. The record was gone. And so I asked legislative leadership in 2012 if they were going to continue that practice, and they indicated that they would. So come the 2013 legislative session, I told my staff, here's what I want you to do. I want you to capture every one of those video streams from the House and every one of the streams from the Senate and post them on our website. Now, we were a little irrelevant state policy think tank at the time, and so no one was really paying a lot of attention to our website until one day the Senate leadership took a look and noticed that all these videos they thought were destroyed were popping up on our website. So I get this call from the Senate Pro Tem's office. They said they need to meet with me. And so I went over there, and all of leadership was there, all of House leadership, all of Senate leadership. And they said, Wayne, we have a policy of deleting the videos that recorded from the House and Senate every 5 days. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, you're violating that policy. And I said, well, that's your policy, not mine. And they said, well, Wayne, what if we asked you nicely, will you go and delete the videos? And I said, absolutely not. It's a record of what transpired on the floor of the House and Senate, and the public has the right to see that. And I said, it sounds to me like you have a problem because now I'm the only person in the state that has a copy of what transpired on this floor. So, and I'm not going to budge, and you say you're not going to budge, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I will help you rewrite your rules so that there is a permanent archive of what transpired in the House and the Senate and the committees and so on. And wouldn't you know, they agreed to go do that. And that rule is the rule that's in effect today. If you go to the legislature's website, you'll see videos and you'll find audio files dating back to 2013. So I think it was a huge win for transparency. And it is an example of the kinds of work that we do. And there are other more topical examples. We're very proud of providing taxpayers with property tax relief, with keeping budgets in check, with reducing and removing regulation. We work quite extensively with the governor's office on some regulatory reform, getting rid of barriers to entry for people who are trying to get a job, but they can't because the state law says if you're ever been convicted of a felony, then you may not be able to get a government license. This last legislative session, we worked on getting us closer to removing and repealing Common Core. We have, hopefully anyway, put the brakes on the social justice agenda that's taking place in our institutions of higher learning, the 4 institutions all over the state. There's just we also worked with the governor on a plan to reduce property taxes using the Federal CARES Act money. So there's a lot of things I can go on, but suffice it to say we're very heavily involved in public policy, and I've been saying we're one of the most influential organizations in the state, but there's another thing. A friend of mine said, well, influence is great, but respect is more important, and I agree with that, and I think there are a lot of legislators who certainly have come to depend on our work and respect our work, and even the folks who are on the opposite side, who are perhaps more liberal than I am, have utilized our work and have thanked us for being involved in this public sphere. Going forward, I think the Freedom Foundation has been working really, really hard to transform public education. I've said this before in my newspaper commentaries. I've said it on stages, so I may as well say it here. I don't think the government should be in the education business. And to the degree that we can influence a discussion that's now taking place, thanks to, if you will, COVID-19, where people are setting up micro schools and they're hiring their own teachers and hiring tutors and using online platforms to educate their kids. We want to be part of the solution that improves, not just changes, but improves the quality of education, and that can really start with a state like Idaho. And in fact, I happen to believe that a lot of parents are primed to see that happen, that they're very anxious to see the quality of education improve for no other reason because of COVID-19. We've been strong supporters of education choice for many, many years. We believe that there's no time like the present to have education choice be the theme, and it shouldn't just be that Timmy is able to attend a charter school, because he or she won the lottery. That happened with my daughter. My daughter spent most of her education in a charter school from 3rd grade to 12th grade. And in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades, it was a great school, but as time went on, the school deteriorated. But education choice doesn't allow a student to slip seamlessly between school franchises. They have to choose one, and that choice lasts for many years. It's kind of like, imagine moving to Idaho Falls and being told you can shop at one grocery store, and then if you decide that you're not happy with that grocery store, it'll take years before you can choose somewhere else to shop. Well, that would be kind of ridiculous. What we want to see is parents have abundance of choice and being able to exercise that choice all the time. Hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, whatever it is that suits them, that is best for their families and for their children. And then we also want to see our higher education system get back on track. We've been talking for many months now about how the colleges and universities in our state have embraced very left-of-center thinking, and it's not just because of a student organization. It's thinking that is being shoved upon the classes and the students and the faculty at an administration level. There are entire administration divisions within our higher education system that's devoted to, equity and inclusion and diversity, which always sounds very nice until you realize that it's really designed to pit different people against one another instead of embracing our differences and celebrating those differences. That actually is designed to put your finger on the scale towards a certain kind of outcome, which only continues exacerbating the problem. So those are the major components that we've been focusing on at the Freedom Foundation, and expect that we'll be talking quite a bit more about that in the 2021 legislative session. Now, I've talked for about 20 minutes, and I want to I think it's been about 20 minutes, maybe a little bit less, but I always enjoy hearing questions from people because it sort of allows me a chance to hear what's on people's minds and also dispel any myths that people have about the Freedom Foundation. And I suspect there are some circulating out there within the questions, so I prefer to spend time doing that. So, David, I'll turn it over back to you to begin that part of the process.
Thank you, Wayne. Thanks very much for your interesting remarks. So I did not know of the early success of the Idaho Freedom Foundation in '04 and '05 to persuade the legislature to reinstate video cameras and to maintain the archives and the tapes. And That was certainly a feather in your cap in those days. And I wasn't aware of your work to improve governmental transparency. So news to me. Thanks for sharing. So I have an immediate question. How were you able to persuade the leadership to do that, to maintain the video cameras and maintain the archived tapes for the improvement of transparency about government?
Well, the maintenance of the cameras was never at issue. The cameras were there, and I think they were going to stay there. Bart Davis had a worry many years ago. If you remember, was the Senate Majority Leader, and he worried that, in his words, I remember this very distinctly, that if cameras were installed in the chambers, senators and representatives would be prone to bloviate. Now, I would argue that there's been some of that, but not so bad, not like in Congress. Congress has other issues that sort of invites bloviation. What the real issue was the destruction of a record, that there was 5 days of archival material, and then that was it. Everything was just, basically they had a big dumpster fire every 5 days with the video from the floor of the House and the Senate and then the committees. I said to Bart Davis at that point, it's too bad. In 1943, the legislature voted to repeal a voter-passed initiative, which I thought was very fascinating. I said, sure would be nice if we had videotape or film of what transpired on the floor, of what our representatives and senators said about that action. And now you will. I mean, in 2023, we'll have had 10 years of videotape. And then in 21, 23, you'll have 110 years. So, I mean, to me, it's a very, very exciting thing that we've managed to create this instrument, not only of a government accountability, but of history.
Thank you. So your advocacy, your persuasive abilities promoted governmental transparency. A question arises because of your success there, Wayne, because the Idaho Freedom Foundation is, in fact, a 501c3 governed by IRS rules that prohibit charitable organizations from attempting to influence a legislative body or trying to influence a body on particular pieces of legislation. It raises a question that a number of people often raise about your organization. Did you then cross a line because you were attempting to lobby the Idaho legislature or persuade leadership to a public policy that reflected your views? And on other issues, some of which you've cited to the credit of your organization, did you cross a line? And if not, help us understand where you would draw that line so that the organization does not run afoul of 501c3 prohibitions.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I get asked it a lot. People misstate what the law actually says. What the law allows us to do is to devote 20% of our resources on lobbying. We have what's called an H election. Not all nonprofit 501c3 organizations have that. We do. We've had it since 2011. And we use that. We actually don't even break the 20% threshold. What we do most of our time is spent educating. Very little of our time or energy is spent on lobbying. And the distinction is that there are times when you go to the legislature and you say, I want you to vote for or against this bill. Most of the time, we're just telling folks what a bill does, or what its impact is on the economy, or what its impact is on free markets or business. So that's most of it is education. But people will say things like, "Oh, you're out there lobbying. A, you're not allowed to do that, or B, you're doing too much of it." Neither one of those things is true.
Yeah, thank you. So you're allowed to use 20% of your resources. So in your case, what would 20% of your budget be?
Well, our budget runs about $700,000 to $800,000 a year.
Mm-hmm. And would you mind sharing with us who your donors are, where your considerable funding comes from?
I never anticipated somebody was going to ask that question, but we don't reveal the names of our donors, and we've been very public about that. The reason we don't is because, like a lot of other charitable institutions over time, they find that those lists are used to harass donors. There are some donors who ask to be revealed and some donors who give us permission to reveal their names, but we don't just go out and say who those people are unless they've asked to or they've given us permission to. I would tell you that 90% of our donors come from within the state of Idaho, and we have about a running total of about 2,300 active donors.
So to calm the anxiety of some Idahoans about your quote-unquote lobbying activities, you're here to say that you don't lobby legislators, that you're not, your advocates are not buttonholing legislators, trying to move them to support a piece of legislation or oppose a piece of legislation.
Well, I didn't say we don't lobby. What I said is we don't lobby near as much as people say we do, and we lobby within the bounds of what the federal regulations allow us to lobby. Well under it, in fact.
Within the 20%.
Within the 20%.
Limit. Thank you. So when you're talking about the activities of your organization to promote public policy in the tradition of your think tank, what do you say to residents of Idaho who wonder, for example, did you go too far in helping to promote a disobey campaign when Governor Little introduced a number of his emergency measures relative to COVID this past spring?
No, the Freedom Foundation serves to promote and educate the values of free markets. And what we needed to say at that time, and I maintain this is true, is that when a government entity compels people to do things that are violative of constitutionally protected rights, it's up to those individuals to determine whether that's appropriate or not. And that's happened throughout time. Virtually every action that has led to the formation of this country and where we are today was the result of an illegal act. Everybody who participated in the Great Revolt against the British Kingdom in the 1700s was guilty of a crime. They disobeyed edicts from the monarchy that said, you shall obey the king's directives, and you shall not go and meet in secret and declare independence. All those things were illegal. Marching in defense of civil rights has been an illegal act. To this day, there are protesters in Bangkok. Maybe you may know that Thailand lives under some very serious rules where if you even speak ill of the monarchy, it can land you 15 years in prison. So what we said is here in Idaho, here in America, we have these constitutionally protected rights. And among those are the right to hold private property, to conduct business, to speak one's mind, to assemble, all those things that were being curtailed by the government. And so we believed it was very important, I still believe it's very important, to remind folks that they have these constitutionally protected rights. They're there for a reason. And when the government comes along and takes those rights from you, you have a choice. You can obey that, or you can disobey that, and you can continue doing your business. And my feeling is that there's more of us than there are of them. And so when the government tries to curtail constitutionally protected rights, it takes a group of people to rise up and say, no, we're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think probably the vast majority of Americans would agree with what you said when you indicate that the First Amendment protects the right of protest, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. That's probably not likely to be controversial. But of course, the IRS rules governing 501c3s prohibit organizations from engaging in illegal behavior. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you say that your organization did participate in that and you acknowledge it was illegal. Could you clarify that, please?
No, we didn't participate in anything that was illegal. We did one rally where people weren't social distancing. And at that rally, I told folks, look, you have to decide for yourself. And I said this in newspaper columns as well, using my First Amendment right. I said, look, you folks have to decide for yourself, and you have to decide for your customers. You have to decide for your employees, for your vendors, the people who you do business with, whether you remain open or not, or whether you stay home or not. My view is that it's totally American. It is the most American thing you can do to make those decisions and not wait for somebody in government to make that for you. Because what do they know that you don't know about COVID-19? As it turns out, they don't know a lot. But businesses, if you're a restaurant, you have to deal with health code all the time. You have to figure out what temperature to keep the refrigerator at, lest the food inside go bad. Similarly, if you're going to have a restaurant going forward, you're going to have to decide how you deal with COVID-19, and that may be wearing masks or having distance between tables or doing nothing at all. But those are your rights to be able to decide those things. And by golly, one thing that our organization has been pretty adamant about, it's the protection and preservation of constitutionally protected rights, and we're allowed to do that. There's nothing wrong whatsoever with us taking that stance.
Thank you. So you're clear in your position about urging Americans to exercise their First Amendment rights to protest and exercise free speech and so forth. Do you all also take the view that the government enjoys powers to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the people, commonly known as the police power of the state, ordained by the legislature, often in emergency situations granted to governors of various states in the case of emergencies, for example, in a pandemic? So 2 questions here for you, Wayne. First, what's your view on the scope of the police power of the state? And then secondly, we'll move on to the question of whether or not you believe that Governor Little went too far, exceeded his authority under statutory authority delegated to him in the case of a pandemic.
Well, states have certain police powers. There's no question about that, and we've argued that in the past. The state does have those abilities. For example, we were talking before this session started about all the smoke in the air. Theoretically, states have the power to, and this is actually an issue that's being litigated presently, that states have the power to say, you know what, we've got a lot of brush in the timberlands, and we need to do something about that to prevent a public health crisis wherein our forests are going to burn down and it'll be raining ash in places like Ketchum, and that's going to be detrimental to the health of our residents. We just think that the government went too far in saying to people that they must stay home. Even healthy people had to stay home, that there were certain types of people, those who were essential and those who weren't. And then you had the governor trying to distinguish between those, where he was on television saying, okay, here's why you can go to your dog groomer, but you can't see the people groomer. I mean, that was kind of silly. So we just think that the government took those way too far. And so as a matter of course, it's up to the people. No one else will do this. It's up to the people to rein that back in and see to it that their constitutionally protected rights remain preserved, and that the government doesn't take it to the nth degree the next time there's some kind of public health emergency. Because the one thing that I've learned in doing public policy over the course of 25 years is whatever power the government gets now, it'll eventually take, and then some. So for example, when we talk about Obamacare, I know a lot of people will say things like, well, Wayne, why are you opposed to the government making people buy health insurance? Don't you know that almost every state in the country, not all the states, but almost every state in the country requires you to buy car insurance? So of course, if the government can make you buy car insurance, it can make you buy health insurance, and then what comes next? Can you make people buy a gym membership? Our concern is that here you had, for the first time in all of humanity, the governments of the world shutting down commerce and industry and telling people to stay home. It's never happened before, not in this level. And you can bet your bottom dollar that 10, 20 years from now, somebody will try it again for some other reason. It might not even be 10, 20 years. It could be 5 years from now. But the point is, this is now a power that the government has granted itself and is using pretty widely and to various extreme forms. So our anticipation is you can bet they're going to do it again unless we push back and say no.
Thank you. So, given your quarrel with the details, quarrel with the policies implemented by Governor Little to address the pandemic, share with us a few of your thoughts about how far government might have gone, how far government should have gone to address the pandemic. What would your organization be willing to accept in the form of regulations of personal behavior and business operations in accord with market principles, but also consistent with the police power of the state?
Well, I mean, I think in our past, a quarantine has been used to quarantine sick people. And I think people have very limited objections to that, although it also remains very worrisome because then the government can just say, well, we deem you to be sick, and here's the reasons why. Obviously, if you're you've got fever and you're vomiting and you're very pale and you can barely stand up and you're having sweats. I mean, in 1918, I suspect it was somewhat easy to see that a person had some condition that required them to be quarantined. And in previous occasions, there have been use of quarantine laws to do that. What we had here was an entire quarantining of people who weren't actually sick and businesses that were closed who weren't directly impacted. There was just the pretense that they could possibly impact and cause the spread of the virus. And that's where government took things too far. And look, there are plenty of examples of where government didn't do those things. Iowa is a great example. Arkansas and Texas didn't shut down to the degree that the state of Idaho did. I'd argue they shut down too much. The country of Sweden, people have noted, did not shut down, did not lock down, did not close their economy. So there are plenty of things that the government could have not done that would have been more in keeping with the principles that have made our country the strongest and the best in the world. But unfortunately, we didn't do that, and we haven't even begun to feel the economic consequences of those actions by the government.
Mm-hmm. Those states that you just mentioned, Iowa, Arkansas, Texas, have recently suffered a large spike with respect to coronavirus cases. But what would you find have represented acceptable limitations? For example, masks. Would you have accepted a governmental policy that said Americans should wear masks up and down the streets or going into businesses, for example? I'm trying to get clear on what you would accept in terms of a regulation on the behavior of individuals in the face of a pandemic in which 6.5 million Americans have contracted the disease and more than 200,000 of our fellow Americans have already died.
Well, look, I mean, I have to preface my remarks by noting that just yesterday, several people in Moscow were arrested for not social distancing. Now, in case you're not clear, this was Moscow, Idaho, not Moscow, Russia, although it's becoming increasingly difficult to tell the difference. This is not the America that I know. They were there in a parking lot outside, and they were arrested singing church songs for not being too far, enough apart, according to the government. That's a problem. The issue that I have with government force and mandates is that it's always very surprising to me, but whether it's for coronavirus or it's for the creation of a park, where somebody from the government will come along and say, I have this great policy. It's so wonderful that we're going to force you to participate in it. Now, isn't that kind of goofy? I have this, public schools are the best schools. Oh, really? Tell me more. Well, they have just wonderful schools. And by the way, we're going to make you pay for those schools. Well, if it's so wonderful, wouldn't I want to just pay? So in other words, with regard to masks, what happened was the government failed to make a compelling case. And so what they did was they raced right to mandate. You must wear a mask. And then we're going to force businesses to be the enforcer of that mandate. Well, if your medicine is good and your experts are solid and the science is wonderful, why must you go to a mandate? Well, the answer is the government has done a lousy job with the argument. And so now we're stuck with this position where there are people out there legitimately who don't want to wear masks and don't believe what their government is telling them or what their government employed scientists are telling them. And that's purely the fault of the government. If the government had done a compelling job, they wouldn't need to mandate. They'd say, oh my gosh, if you go outside, there's a high probability you're going to either get sick or you're going to get somebody sick. And people would have said, You know what? Sounds plausible, sounds credible. I guess I'll do that. But since the government didn't, this is the position that we're in, where you have the mask wearers versus the non-mask wearers, and the people out there who play the role of what they call the Karens, who call the police when they see somebody not social distancing or wearing masks. The right thing to do would have been to allow people to make the decision on their own. But there are many, many people in government who simply refuse to allow that to happen. And now you have folks being arrested for standing too close to one another or going to the beach on a holiday.
So I'm not sure which level of government you're talking about. Of course, medical experts and scientists in the country have testified, written articles, explained on all kinds of programs of the great value of wearing masks, and some of our governmental leaders have simply refused to embrace it. So how do you come down when scientific experts say wearing masks is helpful, but governmental leaders, for example, Donald Trump, is not a fan of wearing masks? What would you say about that disconnect?
Well, not every medical expert agrees that wearing masks is appropriate. There are medical experts who are cautioning against wearing masks. There are medical experts who say if you wear a mask, you might aggravate lung conditions, or you could damage your teeth, or you could become more susceptible to various germs. I mean, there are doctors out there, by the way. There are also doctors out there who are saying these things and whose comments are being censored. I hope that by talking about this, I'm not creating a downvote situation or shadow banning on YouTube or wherever, but the simple fact of the matter is every time you even talk about something that's contrarian, you end up in a situation where the social media algorithms won't allow your videos to get picked up, and so we're not able to have an open, honest discussion about what the proper remedy is, whether wearing a mask is okay or not okay. Bear in mind also, scientists are known to have been wrong since the beginning of time. I mean, there was a time when you were crazy if you were the scientist who said that Earth is not the center of the universe. There were plenty of occasions in which people thought that the moon was made of cheese or that there was a man in the moon. So, I mean, I would argue that as our science develops, there's room for independent thinking. And there are, again, scientists and professionals and doctors who believe that wearing a mask is exactly the wrong thing to be doing. And again, it's not a question of should a politician make the decision or should a scientist make a decision. What I'm saying is, if the scientists and the politicians have done their job and made a compelling case, then people can choose to decide whether to wear a mask or not wear a mask.
Thank you. So you've indicated that you're not in favor of a governmental role in education, which puts you at odds with the Idaho Constitution, which provides that, in fact, the state should establish a uniform, free system of education. It would also put you at odds with one of the great libertarians of American history, Thomas Jefferson, who believed that public education was critical to the health and maintenance of our democratic experiment so that people could be informed and acquire critical skills and become knowledgeable. Would you explain to us, if you don't believe that government has a role in education, why is that? And would you distinguish between, say, public education and higher education, secondary education and higher education?
Well, that's a lot. Let me stick with just K-12 right now, and then we can go to higher education later. But yeah, it does say in our state constitution that it's the duty of the state to create a general, uniform, and thorough education system. I would argue that there is the trouble with education, is that the most you expect is general, uniform, and thorough. How about great? How about quality? How about better than everybody else, or something that's quantitative that you can track and then do something with? We start with just, why don't we just have a system and everybody have exposure to it? That doesn't seem reasonable to me. The other component of it is that it's supposed to be free. Well, as my mom used to say, you get what you pay for. You buy it cheap, you get cheap, and ultimately, if free is the dollar amount we're willing to pay, then you're going to get exactly what a free education has to offer, which is not much. But I tend to think that our founders made a mistake by including public education. in our Constitution. Now, remember that it was added at a time when the public craved public education because we were going through the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution required people to be trained up so they can work on assembly lines. We basically still have that same system of education today, and it's not really benefiting our modern economy. You don't have independent thinkers, you have followers. You have people that are given the same regimen of education, and they take that regimen of education, and 25% of them that actually go to college will end up having to take remedial classes. I think that's a failure. So the question isn't do you educate kids? The question is how you educate kids. I'm a very, very big believer in educating kids as early as you possibly can, to start teaching them when they're months old. But it's a question of who should be doing that. Should the government be doing that with its failures, where you see that test scores haven't improved in 20 years, and that a large number of children struggle with basic things like reading and writing clear into adulthood? I think that's unfair to kids, especially kids who come from poorer circumstances or from or who happen to be marginalized communities. So I want to see the education system improved. As for Thomas Jefferson, I mean, there are a lot of things that people held to be firm beliefs back in the 1700s. Our understanding of, like, look, the sum total of all human knowledge is on my smartphone. Right? I'm one of those lucky kids. I'm 48 years old. I grew up very, very poor, but my parents were very, very proud of the fact that they owned a set of encyclopedias, and that was wonderful. And so I got to know about things clear up to 1960, mind you. I didn't know anything about landing on the moon or John F. Kennedy or anything, but up to 1960, I had the world at my fingertips, and that was such a wonderful thing. Now everybody has access to that in America, and I think that we can deploy that, and we don't need the government to run that system.
Let's return to education in a moment. We have a question about your lobbying group, the Freedom Man PAC. Tell us about that. Has it registered as a lobbying organization here in the state of Idaho?
The Freedom Man PAC is not my PAC.
Is it associated with your foundation at all?
Nope.
No, not in any way related.
No, I know who's behind it, but they're not part of my organization.
Who is behind that?
Well, you'll have to ask them that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You've indicated earlier that your organization is not aligned with a political party, doesn't endorse candidates, I believe, is a disciplined position. But in an editorial written in the Post-Register here in June or July by one of your board members, I think the board member indicated that the 12 freedom indices of the Idaho Freedom Foundation are aligned with the Republican Party. Would your board member be correct in saying that? Incorrect? Would you like to correct the record?
Oh, I think that there are a lot of commonalities you find in our Freedom Index that you find repeated in the Republican Party. You probably find those same things repeated within the Libertarian Party. I suspect there are even some ideas that you might find that show up in the Democrats' platform as well. But we're a nonpartisan organization. That doesn't mean we don't have opinions. What it means is that we're not Republicans, and we don't sit there and give cover to people because they happen to be part of a particular political party, and we don't go after people because they happen to be part of a different political party. We don't say your bill is terrible because you're a Democrat or your bill is wonderful because you're a Republican. We don't belong to a political party, and that's what that notion of being nonpartisan means.
Mm-hmm. Wayne, some months ago, when the Meridian police detained a resident of Meridia for refusing to leave a public park, your website docs the police officer, provided the address and personal information about the police officer. This is an exercise in what is commonly known as doxing. Where does your foundation stand on the position of doxing? Do you regret publishing the address of that police officer, allowing American citizens to come to that officer's home to protest?
Nearly, 60 or 70% of what you just said is wrong. So I welcome the opportunity to correct the record. What happened was there was a woman who was arrested in a Meridian park for being in the park because the COVIDs, right? She wasn't allowed to be in the park. She wasn't allowed to enjoy a sunny day with her kids. Police officer arrested her. For less than an hour, on our Facebook page, we had a picture of the police officer, not the name and not the address of the police officer, just a picture of the police officer. That was taken down. There was, later on in the evening, a protest at the officer's home. Where they got his name, where they got the address, I don't know. But that wasn't a Freedom Foundation thing. I have said openly, and I mean this sincerely, because I've had people threaten to come to my house, don't go to a police officer's home. Don't go to the mayor's home. Don't go to the governor's home. If you want to protest the government, go to City Hall, go to the county courthouse, go to the State House. Those are perfectly permissible places to have your opinions heard, but I don't believe it's appropriate to go to the home of a police officer or the mayor or the governor or any of those elected officials or people who are employed by the government.
Thank you for correcting the record. And in the spirit of friendship, just share with us, what is your address again?
Yeah, I mean, my address is public record. So, I mean, 4772 South Cochise Avenue, Boise.
Thank you for
I actually live
volunteering.
south
You
of
wouldn't do
Boise, and my phone number is on Reddit, so it's not as if I'm very difficult to get a hold of. Don't come to my house, though. Again, like I said, if you want to, send me an email. It's wayne@idahofreedom.org, and I'm happy to chat with you there.
Thank you. One of your legislative analysts, I believe his name is Parrish Miller, has a blog, and I'm not sure if the blog is an official part of your foundation, but he has argued in that blog that an exercise in the dystopian nightmare would be created if, in fact, the government would mandate masks or require people to submit to temperature taking to determine if they have COVID. He's also indicated that Americans have the right to stand up to government and also implied that that would mean that Americans could take down the government. In this era in which we face coast-to-coast violence, could you clarify for us where your foundation stands on what Parrish Miller has indicated and how you feel about the right of protesters to use violence?
Well, it's hard to comment on a blog post that I haven't seen. Parrish is a great young man. He's worked for me off and on over the last 10 years. At one time he was an employee. Today he does work on contract, mostly analyzing legislation. But I can't speak to the blog post he said. With regard to people's behaviors, I'm against use of force against another person. Whether that's punching them in the nose or looting their stores. I believe that to be completely inappropriate, and what's happening and what the government is allowing to happen in places like Seattle and Portland is extremely destructive and not within what I believe is appropriate.
To follow up on that, if you don't like that, what's your view on President Trump's order to clear protesters from the street back in June so that he could walk to a nearby church when, in fact, his law enforcement used rubber bullets and distributed tear gas and so forth? Was that a legitimate First Amendment right where, in your view, government went too far to break up that protest?
Yeah, honestly, David, I only know about it what I read in the newspaper, and so not knowing the details, I just can't really comment on that.
Okay. There's news that Senator Jim Risch has refused to participate in some debates sponsored by statewide organizations in his race with his challenger, Paulette Jordan. What's your general view about incumbents ducking debates? Is that legitimate, or do you think that it undercuts the spirit of democracy, and in the name of transparency, which you tout, does that disserve the people?
I'm a big fan of debates. I mean, I've participated in debates. I've been a moderator in debates. I do have a problem with some of the debate structure that's set up here in Idaho. Most of the debates are done through the public television system, just as I don't think the government should be in the education business. I don't think the government should be in the TV business either. I don't think the government should employ people who serve as moderators in debates for people who are elected to public office. I think it's completely inappropriate. I think that there are plenty of organizations around who can easily do a debate between Jim and Paulette, and I think that they would do a better job than the one being done by the government television system.
Just yesterday, President Trump indicated that he refuses to commit to the peaceful transfer of power in November if he should lose the election. Those words broadcast nationally in all the newspapers. As a president of an organization that advocates freedom, does that position assumed by President Trump concern you? Does it undermine the concept of freedom here in America?
I'm not acquainted with that quote. I don't believe that that's quite what he said. Having said that, to get to the point, what Americans and what Idahoans want, I believe, are elections that are conducted fairly and transparently. I think there are some concerns, legitimate concerns, about whether those elections will transpire in a way that's fair and transparent. To the degree that that does not happen, and undermines the people's confidence in government also. So the thing that we should be pining for right now is an election that's conducted in every single state that's fair and transparent.
And assuming we get that transparency and that accuracy, then you would expect that President Trump would, in fact, engage in a peaceful transition of power.
I mean, I would. I'd also warn against the rhetoric that's coming out of the left as well. I understand that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden have said things that aren't exactly conducive to the smooth and peaceful transition of power after the conclusion of the general election. I don't want anybody to be projecting that. I think everybody needs to be looking ahead toward an election that's conducted fairly and transparently.
Our time together has expired. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed this discussion with our guest, Wayne Hoffman, president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I would remind you that on October 2, the City Club of Idaho Falls will host as its guest speaker Paulette Jordan. We had invited Senator Jim Risch to engage in a debate with Paulette Jordan. He declined, therefore, having offered the debate invitation to Paulette Jordan, we now look forward to hosting her. Thank you for joining us. Take care.